Welcome back to History Class with Dr. W. We're continuing our discussion of the Depression era, and particularly popular culture during the Great Depression. And in these last few lectures, we're going to look at one last realm of popular culture in those years, and that is sports, which provided a welcome diversion in many different ways for Americans who were suffering through the hard times of the Depression. There's a legendary story from the year 1930 that kind of sums up the place of sports in American life. And the legend has it that when a reporter pointed out to Babe Ruth that he earned more than President Hoover, Ruth was making $80,000 a year at that time. Ruth replied, "I had a better year than he did." Well, indeed he did. President Hoover's reputation was plunging along with the stock market and the economy, while Babe Ruth remained the nation's most beloved sports hero at that time. So this is just one small representation of the idea that sports figures like Babe Ruth provided entertainment to the suffering masses, and also millions of Americans find their way into participating in sports during this time, which is going to provide one more welcome diversion from the suffering they were undergoing. Now, spectator sports in America were hard hit by the failing economy. Crowds at professional baseball games, which normally packed huge stadiums, were dwindling. The minor leagues of baseball suffered even more, and several leagues, along with the teams in them, went out of business during the Depression. College athletic programs withered as attendance at college football games dropped. And without that valuable income, many colleges eliminated lesser sports, such as swimming, tennis, gymnastics, and golf, from their curriculum. As most Americans struggled to make ends meet, extra cash for gambling at the horse track disappeared, and the racetracks barely survived. The average purses at the Preakness, Kentucky Derby, and the Belmont Stakes, racing's Triple Crown, shrank by nearly half between 1930 and 35. From roughly 56,000 to 33,000. As we'll see, the little horse named Seabiscuit comes along to, in some ways, save horse racing in these troubled times. Boxing also suffered through not only smaller crowds and decreased gambling interest, but also a drought of quality champions. Only Joe Louis, in the late 1930s, revived interest in the sport. Private sporting interests suffered as well, as golf and tennis clubs struggled to stay afloat, and equipment sales dropped. The athletes participating in all these sports felt the bite of the Depression, as salaries and prize money in virtually every sport were reduced. The average salary for Major League Baseball players dropped from a high of $7,000 in 1929 to $4,500 in 1936. Even Babe Ruth was forced to take a pay cut. Coaches and owners employed unique and creative means to soften the effects of the Great Depression. In 1933, professional baseball added an all-star game, showcasing the game's greatest stars in an effort to draw more fans. Led by the general manager of the Cincinnati Reds, Larry MacPhail, baseball executives appealed to the fans by playing night games, adding color to their uniforms, having ball girls to scoop up foul balls, and broadcasting their games over the radio. College football added the Orange, Sugar, Sun, and Cotton Bowls to their New Year's Day slate of bowl games. And college basketball introduced the National Invitation Tournament in 1938 and the NCAA tournament the following year. Schools attempted to increase interest in their sports by promoting charitable causes and auctioning off equipment. Professional football increased the number of teams making the playoffs each year and incorporated a number of rule changes, including the addition of the forward pass. The era also featured the growth of sports that naturally emphasized theatrics, such as wrestling, ice skating shows, soapbox derbies, airplane races, and the rodeo. Now, we could talk about any of those sports at great length, but I want to talk just a little bit more about the fascination with aviation in the 30s, because it's something we really don't see that much anymore in our present-day popular culture. But for a time in the 30s, Airplane races were a huge fad. This was building on the popularity of aviation following the exploits of Charles Lindbergh and a number of other groundbreaking pilots in the 1920s. Airplane races originated in the 1920s, but by the early 1930s were becoming a national fad. And one of the best pilots in the country was Jimmy Doolittle, who is pictured here on the left. And he won the first, what was called the Bendix Trophy race in 1931, flying from Burbank, California to Cleveland, Ohio, over 2,000 miles at an average speed of 223 miles per hour. Now, Doolittle, of course, is going to be made much more famous later during World War II for his famous Doolittle raid and the bombing of Tokyo not long after the attack at Pearl Harbor. But in these early years of the 30s, he rose to significant fame and celebrity as one of the top racing pilots in the country. Short of Charles Lindbergh himself, there was no figure who so promoted the advance of aviation as Amelia Earhart, the other figure pictured here. Earhart was, without question, the leading female aviator of her era. She started flying in the early 1920s and set about breaking records within just the first few months of stepping into an airplane. She broke a host of records over her lifetime, including airspeed records for a female pilot many times over, transcontinental records, and other records. But she's best known for her transatlantic flights. In 1928, she became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic as a passenger. And then in 1932, she duplicated Lindbergh's flight of flying across the Atlantic solo, and in so doing also became the first person to fly across the Atlantic twice. Earhart became one of the most famous people in the country at that time, inspiring a generation of young girls and women to become more independent and to strive for greater things than society had imposed upon them. Like some of the others that I've mentioned in previous lectures, she inspired a line of merchandise and collector's items, and also became a fashion icon. Tragically, Earhart was lost at sea while attempting to make what turned out to be her final voyage, an around-the-world flight in 1937. Along with her navigator, Fred Noonan, she had completed about two-thirds of the flight, covering more than 22,000 miles, when their plane disappeared in the South Pacific, and after a massive search, they were declared lost at sea. This is a picture of Jimmy Doolittle's plane in the 1932 Thompson Trophy race, which he won at a speed of 253 miles an hour. This just gives you a sense of the kinds of planes they were flying at that time and what it looked like. Even if we account for all the innovations that owners and coaches were investing in their sports in the Depression, it was the individual athletes who undoubtedly kept the fans coming back. A number of athletes during this time are remembered among the all-time greats in their sports. In addition to Babe Ruth, baseball fans thrilled to watch the exploits of superstars like Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Dizzy Dean, Hank Greenberg, and Carl Hubbell. The stars of college football included Don Hudson, Sammy Baugh, Whizzer White, Sid Luckman, and Tom Harmon. The boxer Joe Louis, track stars such as Jesse Owens and Mildred Babe Diedrichson, college basketball's Hank Lucetti, and the golfer Bobby Jones all rank among the finest ever to play their sports. So we'll talk about just a few of these as we go along. And certainly baseball continued to be the national pastime during this era and was the number one sport in the country. And so two of the biggest stars in baseball in the 1930s were Joe DiMaggio and Hank Greenberg. Joe DiMaggio, the Yankee Clipper, one of the all-time greats for the New York Yankees, came from a family of baseball players. Two of his brothers played in the major leagues as well. He had a long and storied career, one of the greatest in Major League history. He He's among the all-time leaders in World Series championships and racked up a number of individual accolades as well. Over a 15-year career, DiMaggio and his Yankees won the World Series 9 times. And he might be best known for a record 56-game hitting streak, which he achieved in the 1941 season. But DiMaggio became an American icon for more than just his baseball skills. He served 3 years in the Army during World War II, taking a chunk out of the middle of his career, but it was thought boosting the morale of the Army and the country by doing so. And he also played with a certain style and grace. It always looked like everything came easily to him, and his play was very fluid. Finally, he became famous once again in the 1950s for his brief marriage to Marilyn Monroe, another American icon. Another of the great players of this era was Hank Greenberg, who played 13 seasons in the majors, most of them for Detroit. Greenberg was Jewish, one of the greatest Jewish athletes of all time, and breaking many stereotypes associated with Jews during that era. He was big and strong. He was one of the biggest power hitters in the game, leading the league in home runs 4 times and hitting 58 home runs in the 1938 season, which was one of the greatest seasons up to that point and remains a remarkable feat. Like DiMaggio, his career was disrupted by World War II. He's the major league player who served the longest during the war, volunteering really as soon as he was allowed to, and serving for 47 months during World War II, losing about 4 years out of what would have been the prime of his career. We can only speculate what his career totals might have been if those 4 seasons in the heart of his career would have been played. As it is, he finished with 331 career home runs and a .313 career batting average, both remarkable numbers, which could well have been higher had he played those other 4 years. At the end of his career, he was the highest paid player in the major leagues, and he was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1951. In the next lecture, we'll look at some of the top athletes in other sports of the Depression era.